Okay, here we go now. Let's get ready. 10, 9, 8. Really mean it this time. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Sorry. Actually, by the time I release this, I sincerely hope that the real thing happens. But as of today, it hasn't, at least at the moment that I'm recording this. But guess what? Just today, just a few hours ago, under the radar, something else in the world of space travel just got released, and I'll betcha almost none of you noticed it. And it had nothing to do with SpaceX, rather with their arch rival Blue Origin, or at least somebody who likes to think of themselves as their arch rival, and their lunar lander system and everything they've been doing with it recently. And just so you know, they've been really, really busy. And by the way, some of you may have noticed my favorite ladder in that last little animation there, but we'll talk about that a bit later. The point is, by coincidence or by design, Blue Origin released a little over a 10-minute video in regards to this lander that they are fiercely in competition with SpaceX about, and also Dynetics, who most of you know is my favorite choice for a lunar lander associated with Artemis. But they made a very, very strong case as to why this is the best choice. They brought up a lot of very compelling points, including why that ladder is so high. And man, it sounded so reasonable. But the Blue Origin human landing system is not reasonable. Not from a financial standpoint, certainly not from a safety standpoint, not from any standpoint if NASA is interested in Artemis actually working, at least for the long run. And if they fail to recognize that, if they fall for Blue Origin's really well-crafted marketing techniques and all of their excellent advertising that they just put out today, Artemis may be a doomed project before it even gets started. And I'm going to explain all of that in just a few moments. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Angry Astronaut. So, for the past couple of days, we've all been sitting, I think most of us anyway, glued to our computers, to our smartphones, etc., hoping, waiting, praying for the launch of the SN8, which at the time of this filming still has yet to occur, but it may occur in a few hours, assuming that we don't have another abort. However, in the meantime, I haven't been sitting idle. I'm just not that kind of a person. And so I've been looking for other types of content to create, in addition to an analysis of the SN8 launch once it does occur, and if indeed there is anything to analyze, assuming the thing doesn't just explode on the pad or explode a few kilometers in the atmosphere. That's not going to tell us very much. Let's hope that we get a lot more than that. But as of right now, I don't know. By the time I release this, we probably will know a whole lot more. But in the meantime, very quietly, Blue Origin released a lot of new information about their human landing system for Artemis. Something that is every bit as big of a deal to them as SN8 is to SpaceX and to most of us. It's a huge, huge deal. And I think most of you who have watched my content know what my opinion of Blue Origin is. Now, if they were to do something different, some sort of breakthrough change in their design or something along those lines that might make this a better lander, a safer lander, a lander that's more likely to make Artemis not only successful but also sustainable, then I would have a change of opinion. I'm totally honest about this. I might change my opinion a bit about Blue Origin, but that is not the case. What this was extremely good marketing, a lot of claims about safety and about other features of this lander that make it sound really, really good, that make it sound like the best choice for Artemis in terms of returning man to the moon for the first time in half a century. But it isn't. It absolutely isn't. As a matter of fact, it's the opposite. It's a lander that is flawed in so many different ways that it might not only end Artemis as a program, but it might end the lives of one or more of the astronauts that are destined to be on it if it wins this bid, which, given the information that was just released today and how impressive it sounded, they may indeed win this bid. And let's hope they don't. But I'm going to explain to you why this is such an inferior lander compared to its competition right now. Okay, a quick review of the Blue Origin human landing system. Blue Origin itself provides only the descent element, which is not reusable, by the way, and then Lockheed Martin provides the reusable ascent element that takes the crew back to the Lunar Gateway, and then you have Northrop Grumman providing the transfer element, which is based on their Cygnus supply ships. Now, during this new presentation, I was expecting Blue Origin to come up with something new, like the Cygnus supply ship could be reusable and fly back to the Gateway, or perhaps the descent element could be reusable or something. But no, none of that. The only thing that impressed me is the sustainability aspect of the ship, which means that the engine runs off of liquid hydrogen and oxygen, both of which can be produced in situ on the moon. And speaking of the engine, the BE-7 is a very exhaustively tested and very powerful engine with up to 10,000 pounds worth of thrust that by the time 2024 rolls around is going to have gone through a hell of a lot of testing, primarily because it's also the engine that's now being used on the New Shepard. The New Shepard is essentially being used as a testing platform for the human landing system for Blue Origin. So the point Blue Origin is making is by the time 2024 comes around, they're going to have a very solid, reliable engine that's capable of running off of fuel that can be manufactured on the moon. As a matter of fact, Jeff Bezos said, quote, "One day we'll be refueling that vehicle on the surface of the moon from propellants made on the moon from that water ice." And I emphasize the words, one day. And this sustainability may not be such a big advantage after all. For one thing, the transfer element is going to be lost regardless, so only the descent portion is potentially reusable. And if you want to reuse the lander, you're going to need to deploy an in-situ fuel processor in order to get it back up, no matter where you go. This lander is not designed to be completely reusable or even close to reusable. However, reusable or not, this engine does give Blue Origin an advantage over SpaceX in one important respect. It can use fuels that are manufactured on the moon exclusively, whereas the lunar Starship is going to require hundreds of tons worth of methane. As a matter of fact, to get the Starship all the way from Earth to land on the moon and then to get it all the way back to low Earth orbit will require almost 1,200 tons worth of fuel. That's the Delta V requirements. And that is an enormous amount of fuel and an enormous amount of tanker refills. Therefore, Blue Origin can point to that and say that they have the superior lander. And why does the lunar Starship require so much fuel? Because it's so damn gigantic. This ship was designed to be sent to Mars, not to the moon. The moon, unlike Mars, does not have the raw materials to manufacture methalox. Sure, it has a lot to manufacture liquid oxygen, but since the Starship is so gigantic, it's still going to require a lot of methane. As I said, we're talking 100-200 tons at least in order to be able to deploy and get back to low Earth orbit where it can pick up more fuel in order to be reusable from tankers in the future. This makes the Starship less efficient and gives Blue Origin a leg up on the competition. In addition, Blue Origin can argue that their BE-7 engine will be far more extensively tested than whatever SpaceX intends to use to land on the moon. They're not going to be using Raptors because Raptors would create a massive debris plume on the moon, potentially causing damage to the ship. That's why you see secondary engines being deployed here for the landing. Now, these are probably not the same kind of engines that are used on the Crew Dragon, the Dracos, that is. There's something different, something new, something we haven't heard anything about yet, which means Blue Origin can say they also have a leg up in terms of development time on their engines versus SpaceX, who really has been spending their time on the Starship and not on landing on the moon. Now, before I get Lunar Starship fans a little too pissed off, let's talk about the other part of the competition. The Dynetics Alpaca is a different story entirely. Even though it also uses methalox, because it is a very small lander, it doesn't require much methalox and therefore not much methane. We're only talking a few tons. The Alpaca is capable of descending all the way to the lunar surface, deploy for a week or so, and then go all the way back to the Gateway or to the Orion as you're seeing here. Either way, it is a completely reusable ship except for the drop tanks. A very, very different thing than Blue Origin. And I've brought this up many times, and I thought Blue Origin might have made some adjustments recently because the competition was heating up, but they haven't. The fact remains that their lander is 2/3 non-reusable, whereas Dynetics is almost entirely reusable, and the few tons of methane that it requires, well, it isn't too hard to get a few tons to lunar orbit. Now, the simplest way would be to simply use the resupply that's already been arranged with the Dragon XL and the Falcon Heavy to bring this methane to the Lunar Gateway for another descent. That would be one way, but there's even more efficient ways to bring methane to lunar orbit to resupply the Alpaca for a whole bunch of descents. And yes, you've heard me say this before. Use the Lunar Starship as an orbiting tanker. It can carry 100 tons worth of liquid methane, enough for dozens of descents by the Alpaca, making this lander a fully reusable and extremely efficient way of getting human beings from the Gateway or from lunar orbit down to the lunar surface time and again, whereas Blue Origin can't do anything like that. And what about their tried and tested rocket engines? Well, the Dynetics lander is going to have the Aerojet Rocketdyne ISE-100 engines, which have been in testing since 2018. Not only is Aerojet Rocketdyne going to painstakingly test these engines, and they are well known for making good reusable engines, they did it for the space shuttle for example, they're also going to be working with Dynetics to test these engines on the Peregrine lunar lander next year, which means that their engines are going to be tested on the moon in 2021 as opposed to 2023 for the first moon testing of Blue Origin. And by the way, this lander is going to be deployed by a Vulcan Centaur, which is the same rocket that's going to be deploying the Dynetics Alpaca. So essentially, this is going to be a dress rehearsal for the Alpaca using the same engines and 3 years before they have to actually use it with people. Okay, so in spite of all the glitz, Blue Origin is coming out behind here. They're losing their transfer element every time they have to use it. That's going to cost money. They're going to lose the descent element every time they use it. That's going to cost money. There's nothing more reliable about the engines and testing, but what about other aspects of safety? Well, as most of you probably know, I have a serious problem with this ladder. I mean, look how gigantic it is, and think about trying to maneuver up and down that in an environmental suit, especially one as bulky as the one that they're planning to use for Artemis. But Blue Origin says that this is all part of the plan. You see, when you're descending towards the moon and decelerating for a soft landing, it's going to create a debris plume. And so the further you put the crew away from the bottom of the ship, the safer the whole arrangement is going to be. And even though you can dial down the force of the engines to 20% of what their normal thrust capacity is, there is probably going to be quite a debris plume when this thing goes down. Not nearly as much as the Starship, but still significant. So this makes sense. Kinda. Oh, and did you see the astronaut right at the bottom of the descent? Let's look at that one more time, shall we? I just left, see, at the bottom. We don't want to show the whole thing, do we? But what about the Alpaca? Wouldn't it have problems with this particular issue? Well, not exactly. First of all, the Alpaca has the engines on the side of the ship and not underneath the crew chamber, which is the main concern that Blue Origin is bringing up. Secondly, it has 8 engines, each of which has far less thrust than the Blue Origin BE-7, so it's dividing the thrust up amongst a lot of engines as opposed to one, therefore creating a much smaller debris cloud over a more diffuse area. So you have less of a problem. Plus, the Alpaca is lighter than its Blue Origin counterpart, therefore creating less of a debris cloud because you're not decelerating as much mass. Oh yeah, and one more thing. Blue Origin says that this huge ladder is necessary in order for the astronauts to be able to lose most or all of the lunar dust that they're going to accumulate during their EVAs. So that's their method of dust mitigation? Just climb a ladder until it all falls off? Well, I suppose if you fall off the ladder and break your neck, you're not going to bring any dust inside. And I'm not making this stuff up. Watch the video. And by the way, if you think I'm overreacting as far as this ladder thing is concerned, go ahead and listen to my interview with Kathy Lorini, the manager of human landing services over at Dynetics. She has decades of experience over at NASA, knows what she's talking about, and details all of the dangers of a ladder like this. So, in conclusion, I'm kinda disappointed, believe it or not. I really thought Blue Origin was going to make some changes and modifications to this thing to make it more competitive. Add more reusability, get that ladder out of there, add some kind of ascent system to make it safer to get into the crew section. Make it less expensive, but instead it has all the drawbacks that I thought it had in the first place. It's going to cost a lot more money putting Artemis at risk, and it's going to be a lot more dangerous, again, putting Artemis at risk. But it's being very well marketed, and that could make this thing the most dangerous of all when it comes to the future of putting man back on the moon. Now, I know it's probably going to be pretty much in the back of everybody's minds, especially on a day like today, as to whether or not Blue Origin is responsible for killing Artemis. Everybody's thinking about the Starship, and so should they be. But nevertheless, the Starship alone is not going to be, well, it could theoretically be enough, but SpaceX really shouldn't have to spearhead mankind's return to the moon and to the return of the exploration of anywhere besides low Earth orbit by itself. NASA and other organizations should be involved in this, and Artemis is the best way for this to happen. And what happened today, strangely enough, and I'm not certain if this was intentional on Blue Origin's part, trying to steal some of SpaceX's thunder on this particular day. I have no idea what the timing was, but it was very good timing. It was something to put a little bit of the spotlight back on them and to try to convince the decision makers at NASA that what they are putting forward, their lunar lander, their American team, or whatever they want to call themselves, is the best solution for putting man back on the moon. And it simply isn't. Even though you've seen in the video how it has certain advantages over the Starship, that concerns me a little bit. Also, the fact that they're working exclusively on this lander, whereas SN8 is really not going to show us a great deal about how the lunar Starship is going to function. This is a test that involves a takeoff and a landing that has nothing to do with what a lunar lander is going to execute. It's almost as if SpaceX is in danger of being taken out of this competition at an early stage, which leaves Blue Origin and Dynetics. And as most of you know, I believe that Dynetics is by far the superior product when it comes to a lunar lander, not on a broad scale, a does everything type of ship. And we're talking about a lunar lander designed to scout the surface. As you've seen in the course of the video that I just showed you, they definitely have the best ship. But now that all this really effective marketing has come out now, and given the amount of power, the amount of influence, and the amount of just the old boys network that Blue Origin has gotten themselves connected with in this particular bid, I am frankly concerned that they may win this thing. And if they do, given the extreme expense of this particular lander, I mean, just testing it for the first time unmanned, as they're promising to do, is going to be expensive enough as it is. And given what a limited amount of funding Congress has approved for the human landing system, I just don't think that Blue Origin and their partners are going to be able to do it for that kind of a price. But if they get chosen, it's going to sink the whole program until NASA gets enough money to complete it. So many things that could doom Artemis associated with this lander, and I really hope that it doesn't win the bid. But it could, and I'm just not looking forward to the day when it might. But all of that having been said, you know that I'm one of the very few producers of content here on YouTube, space content anyway, who slams on Jeff Bezos and his brainchild. I feel I'm justified in doing so. Others feel otherwise. But as you know, I'm pretty blunt about it. If you like my approach, you know how to support my channel. It's all in the description. And get me to 40,000 subscribers so I can get rid of this associated with another company, Boeing, that I'm not very fond of, when we get to 40,000 subscribers and the spectacular event that will come after that particular moment. So Until the moment of truth comes at the beginning of next year and we find out who's going to win the bid for the human landing system to put humans back on the moon. And let's hope that NASA has the foresight and the wisdom to make the right choice in this situation. I urge all of you to stay angry about space.